In this tutorial you will learn how to self-host your Next.js website on a cheap VPS server together with a local Postgres database. I will walk you through everything step by step, and I will even provide a gist file with all the instructions and commands that you have to execute. Then we will configure our server to make sure that it is secure and all the cool Next.js features still work. We will set up Nginx and PM2, which are necessary to run our app, and we will even install a free SSL certificate and connect a custom domain so that we can reach our website on the internet under a real URL. I will even provide a sample project if you don't have your own so that you can follow along. Welcome to Coding in Flow. I'm Florian Walter and I make web dev tutorials that cut the fluff and get straight to the point. If you want to learn at high speed, subscribe to the channel. But first let's clarify, why would you self-host your Next.js website in the first place? Vercel, the creators of Next.js, are also a hosting provider, and they make it incredibly easy to host a Next.js website. It just takes a few clicks. You can connect a GitHub repository, Vercel automatically pulls the code, it deploys the project, and a minute later everything just works. And if you want to update your app, you just have to push these changes to the main branch of your repository and the changes will be deployed automatically. And since Vercel uses serverless functions, the infrastructure automatically scales with the demands of your project. So if you have a sudden spike in traffic because your website became viral overnight, for example, then this usually doesn't cause any problems because Vercel can just provide more serverless functions if necessary. Vercel also provides a CDN, a content delivery network, which makes sure that your pages load fast all over the globe. But you pay a price for this convenience. A Vercel Pro account starts at $20 a month. And if you exceed the quotas that are included, you have to pay additional fees, and this way you get quickly to $30 a month or even much more depending on the traffic on your website. VPS hosting on the other hand is very cheap. You can get your own server for $5 a month and it's enough to handle thousands of users and even multiple websites. And serverless functions like Vercel uses them also have downsides. For example, you can't use them to run long-running connections. For example, WebSockets don't work in serverless functions because they require a long-running connection, but you can create a WebSocket on your own server. In general, your own web server gives you more flexibility in what you do, and it's also a great learning experience to set up one yourself. Now in this tutorial we will not use Docker because it's not necessary and it adds another layer of complexity on top. I wanted to keep this tutorial simple. Just deploy the Next.js website and your own database. First, let's take a look at the sample project. We will later deploy this together to our VPS. And I added different Next.js features to make sure that they later still work in production. On the first page we have a to-do list. The data in here is loaded via a server component, and when we add or remove a to-do, this is executed via a server action. And the page is refreshed by calling revalidate path. This way I want to make sure that server components and server actions still work properly on our server later. The data is stored in a Postgres database. Here I use an external one, but later in production on our server we will install a local Postgres database, which is free, and we will have a ton of space to load our data. So when I refresh the page, the to-dos are still there because they are stored in our database. We have this dynamic page, which is just a page that loads after a delay of 2 seconds. Nothing special in here, but every time we open this page, we get a short loading delay to make sure that these suspense boundaries, these loading files still work. Let's take a look into the project maybe. Here we have a loading TSX file, which is a Next.js feature that shows this loading indicator. And on the dynamic page, I added export const dynamic force dynamic to make sure that Next.js never caches this page. And here we have a delay of 2 seconds before this page loads. Similarly, we have a static page which also shows some text after a delay of 2 seconds, but here I didn't add this force dynamic export, which means that Next.js will at build time cache this page statically, which means that when we open the static page, we don't get this delay anymore because this page is cached, even though here we have the same timeout of 2 seconds. This way we make sure that caching later works on our website. And then we also have this ISR page, which showcases incremental static regeneration. ISR is like a middle way between static and dynamic rendering. We also cache this page, but only for a duration of 30 seconds. And after 30 seconds, we render this page again. which we can check by looking at the last rendered date that I print here. So now if I refresh this page, this date should change. There we go. Now if I refresh this for the next 30 seconds, then the date will not change again, because now this page is cached. But after 30 seconds, when we then refresh the page again, we get a new date. We can of course change this number here to a different amount of seconds, whatever we want. There we go, we get a new date, and it would be nice to see that this works on our own server later as well, because it's an important feature. Next we have a streaming page, which streams in 3 components one after another with a delay. Again, this is based on server components and suspense boundaries, which show these loading indicators for the components while they are loading. So every component here has a timeout of 2 seconds and is wrapped into a suspense boundary. This way we want to make sure that streaming works on our server later, because this is kind of a special feature. Because usually your server loads all the data and then returns the page at once. But here it works different. It doesn't return the whole page at once. It returns part of it, but the part in the suspense boundary is still not loaded yet. And the server has to stream in this part here later, one after another. And we want to make sure that this also works. Lastly, I added a page that makes a call to a route handler. This is a server endpoint where we fetch a joke. This is a client component, and we want to make sure that this works as well. I also added a middleware to this project to later check if this runs, which just prints a log message to the console for the path it currently runs on. So here we can see the different pages that we opened previously. On the front page, I use a Next image here for my logo, which we can find on the front page TSX file. Here we use a Next image, and the special thing about these Next images is that they automatically resize your image to make sure that we are not loading a huge image into memory, and they also turn it into a different format, into WebP, so the file is as small as possible. So the logo I added to this project is huge, and it's a PNG file. But the logo here, if we open this in a new tab, you can see that this downloads a WebP file, which is also much smaller. Only as big as we need to load it here, or slightly bigger. This is automatic image optimization that Next.js provides, and later on our server we will check if this still works, if it resizes our image and changes it to WebP automatically. In this project I use Prisma as my ORM, but this doesn't matter. You can use any ORM, you can use raw SQL. For the purpose of this tutorial, it's not important. And now we want to deploy this baby on our own server, so let's go. So first we need a VPS, a virtual private server. These things are not free, but they are much cheaper than running your website on Vercel. We will use Hostinger, who are also sponsoring this video. I've used Hostinger for personal projects in the past, and I never had any problems, and they also have some really cool features like automatic backups, DDoS protection, a control panel that makes it very easy to find the different features that you need. And the coolest thing is they gave me a coupon code just for my viewers to get 10% off. So if you want to purchase your VPS here, go to hostinger.com/codingandflow. I will also put this link into the video description. And then choose your plan. Now KVM1 is actually already enough. You get a ton of power here, 4 GB of RAM, 50 GB of disk space, which is a ton. But I'm gonna pick KVM2 because it gives you the most bang for the buck. Everything is 2x'd, as you can see here. Twice the cores, twice the RAM, twice the disk space and bandwidth, but the price is not 2 times as high. So this is what I'm gonna pick. We click on choose plan. You can select the period. The coupon code will work for 12 months or 24 months. So here you can click on have a coupon code and enter coding in flow like this. Click on apply and we get an extra 10% off the price. Click on checkout to purchase this, and then you have a whole server to run multiple apps for a whole year. Then go into your account and let's set up the VPS together. You have to pick a location for your server. It makes sense to pick something close to where your users later will live. I'm gonna pick Germany because I am in Germany and I will only use this website myself. Continue. Hostinger will automatically install an operating system on your server. We click Plain OS and select Ubuntu. Here we select Ubuntu 24 I'm gonna unselect the malware scanner because I want to make sure that this doesn't interfere with our setup later, but you can probably use this. This is a feature Hostinger provides. Next, we have to set a password for our server. We will later actually completely disable password login because passwords are too easy to lose. But for now, we need one. So I'm gonna write, I don't know, self-hosting 123. We just have to remember our password, otherwise we have to reset our server later, because then we won't get in there. We don't add an SSH key here. We will later add an SSH key via the terminal instead. And then we click on continue. We confirm that everything is correct and click on Finish Setup, which creates our server. After waiting a bit, our server is ready and we can go to the control panel by clicking on Manage VPS. And there we are, our own server. To log into our server, we need to copy this root access command, which starts with ssh root add and then the IP address of your server. We copy this. And then we have to open a terminal. Every operating system has one. On Windows it's called PowerShell, and here we insert this command. Press enter, and then we have to confirm this here with yes, only the first time we log into the server. So type in yes, press enter again, and then we have to insert our password, which was in my case self-hosting 123. There we go. Now we are inside the server. So now you will notice that this line starts with root add because now we are inside the server and every command we execute in here will be executed not on our local computer but on this remote Linux server. For this tutorial I provide this instructions file that contains all the commands that we need to execute one after another. So we already have our server, we logged in as root. Now we need to update the Linux packages with this command. I'm just gonna copy paste this. You can find the link to this just in the video description below and copy paste the commands from there. Let me split the screen so that we can see the commands and the terminal at the same time. So here inside our server we execute this command apt update and apt upgrade, which updates the packages on the server, similar to a npm install or npm update with Node. Next, it's a good idea to create a new user because it's considered bad practice to do everything as the root user, because the root user is something like an admin with elevated rights, and when we use this user all the time we can do a lot of damage. Instead, we want to create a new user with limited permissions. We do this with the add user command in all lowercase as one word, and I'm gonna call mine Florian. You can give this whatever name you want. Add user Florian. We have to give him a password, so type in whatever you want. We have to repeat it. Then we can set some metadata for this user, the full name, and I'm going to keep the rest empty. Is this information correct? Why? Yes. And there we go, we have our new user. So this new user is not an admin, but sometimes we need admin permissions to execute certain commands. This is why we have to add this user to the sudo group. You might have heard of this before. Sudo is a command with which we can temporarily get these admin permissions. So next we insert usermod -ag, which stands for add group, sudo, so we add a user to the sudo group, which one? Florian. And we can actually use tab for autocomplete here. So now Florian should be a sudo user. We can test this out by logging out of the server with the logout command. Then we want to log in again with SSH, but this time Florian at the server IP address. Now we have to insert our password that we set up a moment ago for this user, and now I'm logged into the server as Florian and not as root anymore. Now we can check if we have sudo permissions with this command here. Sudo -v. This is not necessary, just to see if we have sudo rights. We have to insert our password again, and if this doesn't complain, then it means sudo works. This just increases the current login session if I remember correctly, so this doesn't do anything important. This is just to check if sudo works. Okay. Next we want to get rid of password login altogether and also of the root user, because again passwords are insecure and using the root user is a bad practice, so it's better to disable both of them to make sure that we never use them. Instead of password login we want to use SSH keys, which is a key that we put on our computer, and this allows us to log into our server from this machine without entering a password. For this we have to create a folder for our SSH keys on the server, so we copy this command, paste it here while we are logged in as Florian on our server, which creates this directory. mkdir stands for make directory. This creates this SSH folder, and chmod sets the permissions so that we can access this folder. Now we can check if this folder actually exists with ls-a. ls stands for, I think, list files, I'm not sure, and a means all files. We even want to see the hidden ones. This is what this -a flag is for. And there we go, in this really hard to distinguish blue color. I don't know who thought it's a good idea to put dark blue on a blue background, but here is this SSH folder. Make sure it's there. Then we need to log out of our server again. And now when this starts with C colon and not with Florian at server IP anymore, we know that we are back on our local machine. And on our local machine, we want to generate the SSH key. So we copy this line, paste it in here, but we have to replace this for our email address. You can type in whatever you want. florian@codingandflow.com. The rest has to stay as it is. Then we press enter. Then we have to define where we want to store this SSH key. We can keep the default setting here. Just press enter without entering anything. We can add a passphrase to our key. This is an additional password that protects our key in case we lose our laptop, for example. It's not mandatory. You can leave this empty if you want, but I'm gonna add one here because it's another layer of security. There we go. We can ignore this random art. It's not really important what this does. The more important thing is that now in our user folder on our PC, we can find this SSH folder, and in here it should look somewhat like this. There should be these two files with ed255 and also the known hosts file. And we can open them with the text editor, just a regular notepad. And in here we should find our new server IP address that we just connected. It's this one in my case. And this key here is what we want to put onto the server because this allows us to log in without using password login. So the next step is to push this SSH key that we created to our server. And the command is different depending on your operating system. You can copy the one you need. I'm gonna need the Windows one here, so I copy this, paste it in here, but before we send this, we have to make some changes. So here we need to put the username, which is Florian, and the server's IP address, which we can find in our Hostinger dashboard. Let me copy this right here, paste it here, and the rest can stay as it is. Then we confirm this with enter. We have to add our password again, and this should now have sent this public SSH key to our server. So we can check this by logging back into our server with the usual SSH Florian command. Password. Now this is not our user password anymore. This is the passphrase for our SSH key, if you defined one. If you didn't set a passphrase, then it won't ask you. It will just log in automatically. Okay, but it means that our SSH keys work. So next we want to disable password login altogether and also root. And we can do this by making changes to the SSH configuration, which we can do via this command. Sudo nano and then this path. And nano is a text editor on Linux. It's a simple text editor with which we can modify files like this one. Here we want to change these things I listed here. We want to set address family to inet. So where is it? It's down here, but it's commented out. If there's a comment in front of it, just remove it to activate it. Set this to inet. This disables IPv6 IP addresses, and it only keeps IPv4 enabled. This is considered a good security practice because we don't use IPv6 for anything here, so it's a good idea to lock this and not make it available anymore because it's just another attack vector for people to access our server. Next, we want to set password authentication to no. So we have to search it here in our list. Somewhere here it will say password authentication. There we go. Here it is. We comment this out, change this to no, and permit root login, which is somewhere below. In this case, it's at the end. There, permit root login. We set this to no as well. Then we press Ctrl X, confirm this with a Y, and then we press enter to save the changes to this file. So now we have changed this SSH configuration. Now we have to open this file once again with sudo nano, because you will notice at the top here is this include line. It includes this other configuration file. So we want to open this one. We can copy this line, close nano with Ctrl X, and then we run sudo nano, but with this other file now, the other path. We open this one, and as you can see here is password authentication, yes, again. What we do is we make this empty, save this again with Ctrl X, Y, enter. So in our SSH configuration, we can include these more granular configuration files, like the one we just saw. If there is such an include line in your SSH configuration, make sure that the other one is empty. Or what you can also do is you can put all of this configuration into this smaller configuration file. This is up to you. So this is the main configuration file, and those are more specific configuration files that override the main settings, so to speak. But we just made it emptier so that all the settings of our main configuration come into effect. Now IPv6, password login and root login should be completely disabled, but this will only come into effect after restarting the SSH server, which we do with this command. Now sometimes you have to enter SSHD at the end instead of SSH, but on Ubuntu it should be SSH. So we restart this. Now we want to verify that our changes work by logging out of our server again. And first I want to try logging in as root, which should not work anymore. Root add. Yeah, it says public key because password login is disabled and also root login. So we won't be able to log in with the root account anymore or with passwords. We can only log in using our SSH key, which comes with a passphrase, but again that's something different from a password. Cool, next we want to install a firewall which protects our server from unauthorized access. It closes all the ports except for the ones we need. We can do it with this command. Sudo apt install UFW. UFW stands for uncomplicated firewall. We install this. We have to insert the sudo password. And there we go. Now this package is installed. Next we want to whitelist all the ports that we need. We need the SSH port for login. So we just enabled it. Then we want to do the same for HTTP. There we go. And HTTPS. We have to whitelist all of these ports, and then we have to enable the firewall altogether with sudo UFW enable. We confirm this with yes. And if you forgot to whitelist the SSH firewall and you log out of your server, then you won't be able to log back in again. In case this happens, don't panic, you can always reset all your settings here in the Hostinger panel. Here under settings we can reset the firewall configuration if necessary, or SSH configuration. In the worst case you can also reinstall the operating system, which resets everything here via this button. And Hostinger also has this cool AI helper which is called Kodi, here it is. And you can ask it for things. You can ask it, for example, to reset your operating system, and it will do it for you. You can give this a try, but if you set up the firewall like I showed you, there shouldn't be any problems. Okay, cool. We can check the status of our firewall with this command, sudo UFW status. There we see our 3 different ports that we allowed. Next, it's considered a good idea to disable pings to our server, because with pings, bad actors can see that our server is available, which makes it easier to attack it, but there are different opinions on this. But it doesn't hurt to do this. First of all, let me show you what I mean by ping. For this, I open a second terminal that runs on our machine, not on the server. But you don't have to follow along with this, I just quickly want to show you something. So here I can type in ping, followed by the IP address of my server and -t, and this now pings our server. And what we want to do is disable this, so that when we ping our server, we don't get a response back. Because again, this tells hackers that our server is available on the internet. And it's considered a good idea to hide this information. So we can change this by making changes to the firewall rules, again with nano. So we open this configuration file. Here we want to go to the block that says for input, this one here. And here we want to add this line with the dash at the beginning and the drop at the end. We insert it here. Again, we save the changes with Ctrl X, Y, enter. But these changes will only come into effect after rebooting our server, which we do with sudo reboot. This restarts the whole server. Now we won't immediately be able to log back in again while the server is booting up, but after a few seconds or a minute or so, we will be able to get back into our server. Also, when we open the other command line again, we shouldn't be able to ping the server anymore. We shouldn't get a response back. And it looks good, request timed out. This is what we wanted to achieve by disabling pings. This made our server a little bit more secure. Let's see if we can log back into our server. Yeah, passphrase. And we are back in. Next, we need to install Node.js because Next.js is a Node.js app and we need Node.js and NPM and all of this stuff to run our Next.js app. So first of all, we execute this command, which fetches the package information for Node.22 from some external website. So let's run this. Then we run this command. Enter. Password. We wait until this has finished. If it asks you to confirm anything with Y, then go ahead and do it. And finally, we can install Node.js, which installs it on this Linux machine, just like we install Node.js on our local development machine. We can confirm that this worked with node-v to check the version and npm-v. There we go, we have both installed. Now we want to do the same for Git. We need Git to fetch our repository later. So sudo apt install git. We execute this. And then we check the version with git-v. There we go. Next we want to install Postgres as our database, right? Because we want to run this locally on the server. So we copy this whole command, put it here, which installs PostgreSQL. We confirm this if necessary with a Y. And then when this is finished, we can start PostgreSQL with this command here. So let's insert this as well. And then we can check if it's actually running with PostgreSQL status. And it should look like this. Our database is now active. Nice. Next, we want to start a Postgres prompt, which is another command line that runs inside Postgres, and we can open it with this command here. Sudo u Postgres psql. Let's run this, and now this starts with Postgres. And now anything we execute in here will be executed in this Postgres command line. And now we want to run all of these commands here one after another, but make sure to include a semicolon at the end because otherwise this will not work. And of course we have to replace the database name for an actual name. So we paste this command here, but I didn't want to execute this right away. I want to replace this for the database name. Create database, you can give this any name you want. This will be the name of your database in your app later. I'm gonna call this my database because I'm not very creative. We execute this and we can see that it worked when it outputs create database. Now we do the same for the second line, but I'm gonna copy this without the semicolon at the end because this seems to send this command as soon as I paste it in here. Instead I add the semicolon myself. Now we want to create a user, which we have to give a name. This doesn't have to have the same name as your Linux user. It can also be something different like admin or default or whatever, but I'm gonna name this Florian again. And then we have to set a password. And the password has to be inside these single quotes here. And I'm gonna set this to ASD123. Of course, your password should be more secure. And we later use these credentials to connect our Next.js app to this database. So you have to remember them. So we confirm this with enter again. It should output create role. Now the next line, we have to make some modifications to the user we just created. And we should get autocomplete in here, I think, with tab, yeah. Alter role Florian, set client encoding to UTF-8, confirm. And you might have noticed that I forgot to add the semicolon at the end. This is why we didn't get a confirmation. So let's do this again. Let's insert this line again with the semicolon at the end. Very important. And again for the user Florian. Yeah, I messed something up here. It looks like I inserted this line 2 times. So let's do this properly again. Only once, of course, with a semicolon at the end. This is how it should look. Alter role, username, and then the rest with a semicolon at the end. And then it should confirm it by printing alter role. There we go. The command line is not very forgiving if you make any mistakes. Now we insert the next line, and again let's not forget the semicolon at the end. Alter role, again Florian. Then we have to make these other changes. Confirm. Then we set the time zone with this one, with the semicolon. Again Florian. There we go. Then this one, grant all privileges on database to Florian, semicolon, and the database name is what we set up a moment ago. My database, like this. Enter. It should output grant, and just 2 more commands. /z, my database, Postgres. You are now connected to a database, my database, as user Postgres, and now we have to execute this command here. Grant all privileges on schema public to Florian. There we go. This should be all the Postgres configuration necessary, and now we can exit the Postgres prompt with \q. And now we are inside our server again. Okay, so Postgres is configured. Next we need to create a folder where we put our Next.js app in. You can call this whatever you want. I call this folder apps. So now when we type in ls, we see this new apps folder here. We can go inside this folder with cd apps, and again we get tab autocomplete here. Now we are inside the apps folder. If you want to go back, you can do this with cd ... Now we are back inside the parent folder, but I want to go into apps. Because in here we want to git clone our project, our Next.js app. We have already installed Git earlier, and this is the sample project I provided, which is public on GitHub, so we can clone it right from this GitHub repository. If you want to clone a private GitHub repository, you will have to set up an access token on GitHub, which you can do in your account settings here. You can go to settings, developer settings here at the bottom, and here you can set up a personal access token, which you can use as the password in the command line to clone a private GitHub repository. But the sample repository is public, so we shouldn't be required to insert a password. Instead, we can just clone it publicly. Oops, I haven't made it public yet. This is why this asks me for the GitHub username. I'm gonna cancel this, and I will set the sample project to public, and I will keep it as public. So down here, visibility, change to public. You should probably not do this for your personal project. Instead, you should use a personal access token. Okay, now that the repository is public, we should be able to clone it without a password. There we go. Now it's cloned, and it should be inside this folder. There it is. Next self-hosting. We can cd into it with cd and the name of the folder. And now we are inside this Next.js project, which contains the usual files. Package.json, configuration files, and so on. The next step is to create a .env file in here, which will contain our database credentials and also this environment variable, which I put into the project just to make sure that public environment variables still work as well. So we can create this env file with the nano editor. Sudo nano.env. But now it's important that you are inside the project folder of this Next.js project, because in here we want to put this .env file, right? Enter. And now we insert these environment variables in here and the database URL. Of course, in the database URL are some placeholders for our username and password, which are the Postgres credentials we set up earlier. So I named this Postgres user Florian as well. The password was ASD123123. We create a connection at localhost 5432. This is actually the port that Postgres uses by default. And here we have to insert the database name, which in my case was my database. And the rest can stay as it is. Control X, Y, enter to save this. And now we have a .env file in here. Don't worry, there are just a few more steps necessary and then this will run forever. Next, just like we do in local development, we have to install the Node modules with npm install, which we can just run in here. If this tells you to update your npm version with this command, you can go ahead and do it, just like you would do it on a local machine. Install this as well. And we need sudo rights for this, so let's try this again with sudo npm install. This is necessary because we install this package globally, which needs sudo permissions, and then it should work. There we go. Next we want to install Nginx. So Nginx is a so-called reverse proxy. It's a bit difficult to summarize what this does, but this basically takes the traffic that comes into our website and it routes it to the app that we want to serve. For example, the Next.js app runs on port 3000 and we tell Nginx, okay, when someone opens our website under this IP address or our URL later, then serve this Next.js app on port 3000 to the user. Nginx also allows us to run multiple apps on the same server. For example, when you run a MERN app, you could have the front end and the back end running as completely different apps. They could even run on different URLs, and Nginx would decide which of these apps runs depending on the URL that the user opens. Nginx can also do cool stuff like load balancing and rate limiting, but you can Google this if you have more questions. We need this to run our Next.js app on the server. So we need to install Nginx with this command up here. Sudo apt install Nginx. Execute this. Confirm this with Y. And when this is finished, we need to create this Nginx configuration file with this command for our Next.js app. Paste it here. And then we get a brand new file. And in here we want to copy paste this part, which you can copy from my gist. We paste it in here, but we have to replace the server name for our IP address here, which again we get from Hostinger. This one here, it will be different for your server. Copy this, paste it here with the semicolon at the end. And this will take all the traffic to our website. This is why the location is just a slash. This is our whole website on this server with this IP address. And it routes it to localhost 3000 where our Next.js app is running. And these two settings down here are necessary for the Next.js app router to make sure that streaming still works. Streaming is when you load a server component after a delay and show a loading indicator instead. I showed you this in the very beginning, and in order for this to work together with Nginx, we have to add these two lines here, which are already included in this configuration file. So now we want to save this file with Control X, Y, enter. Then we have to link this new configuration file to make sure it becomes active, which we do with this command. Execute this as well. Then we want to remove the default configuration. Just copy paste this command in here as well. Then we can check if our Nginx configuration is still valid with sudo nginx-t. And it says syntax is okay, test is successful, which means that our configuration is set up correctly. If this tells you any errors, then double check if you added all the semicolons and your IP address and everything. Then we have to restart Nginx with this command to make sure that the changes come into effect. Okay, almost done. The Postgres database we set up on the server doesn't yet contain the tables that I configured in my project. We have this one to-do table, right? We can either use SQL commands to create this table ourselves, or we can use Prisma, which is the ORM that I'm using here. Now you should read up on database migrations, and ORMs like Prisma or Drizzle provide features to implement these migrations. We will do it very easy. Here in our project, I'm going to execute npx prisma-db push, which pushes our database schema to this Postgres database, and it creates the necessary tables. So npx prisma-db push inside this Next.js project folder. And if this doesn't show an error, it means that we now successfully pushed our database schema to our Postgres database. If this shows an error, then there is probably a mistake in your database connection string that you put into the .env file. You can double check it with sudo nano.env and make sure that this string here looks correctly with the username and the password and all the other stuff in here. Database name, make sure this is correct. And if it still doesn't work, try executing all these SQL commands that we did earlier and make sure that you include all the semicolons. Only if we configure this properly, we can push our database changes to the database. But mine worked, which means that this database on the server now has this to-do table that I set up in Prisma. Now we can build our project and we can finally start it. Let's try this out. npm run build, still inside the Next.js project folder. This will compile the project, and when it's finished, we run npm start. npm start, which runs this app on port 3000. But since we have Nginx configured, we don't have to open port 3000. We can just open this root directly, our IP address. Let's try this out. There we go. Now our website runs on this server. Later we will connect a real domain to it so that we don't have to open it under this IP address. And we will also add an SSL certificate so that this not secure text here disappears. But our app should already work. We can even go to our to-do list and add items to our Postgres database and refresh the page and the data is still there. Isn't this cool? And all the other features also work. Super cool. We can also see our middleware logs here in the console for all the different paths that we run, because this is part of our code, right? It prints these logs to the console when we execute the middleware. Now, just like in local development, we can stop the execution with Ctrl-Z, but now when we refresh the page, we can't reach it anymore because we need to keep it running on the command line. Of course, this is not very good because we don't want to keep the command line open all the time to run our website, right? This is why we need a process manager that keeps the website running for us. And this is the last step for the server setup. We have to install PM2, which is a process manager. And we do this with sudo npm install g PM2. So let's run this as well. Wait until this has finished. And with the next command, we can run our Next.js app again, but this time using PM2 instead of manually running it via the command line. Okay, let's paste this command as well. So now we have this Next.js app running via PM2. And I added a bunch of useful PM2 commands that you might need from time to time. For one, we can check the PM2 status, which just shows us this screen again with the running processes. PM2 is also how you access your logs now. So our middleware log, we can now see under PM2 logs. So now when we open our website again, it should be reachable again. There we go. And we should see the logs here in the PM2 console. We can close this with Ctrl-Z. We can clear the logs with PM2 flush. Now the logs are empty. And if you need to restart your Next.js app, for example, after you made changes to the code and you pulled the latest changes from GitHub, then you rebuild your project and then you want to restart it, right? You do it with this command. This is the same as npm start, but it uses PM2 instead of the command line. Okay. Finally, we want to make sure that if our server ever reboots, for example, because of maintenance, that it automatically restarts our Next.js app and we don't have to do this manually. Because you don't want to wake up one day and your Next.js app is not running because your server restarted. We can do it with this command, PM2 startup, which prints another command to the console. Here, let's make this bigger to see the whole command. You have to copy this, Ctrl-Z, and execute this as well. And this runs the actual startup command. Okay, perfect. Now, even when we reboot our whole server, PM2 should automatically start our Next.js app again. Let's try this out with sudo reboot. Now for a few seconds or a minute or so, we shouldn't be able to reach our website anymore because our server is down currently. It reboots and there's nothing we can change about it. But after the server is back up, the Next.js app should automatically restart. So after waiting for, I don't know, half a minute or so, we should be able, yeah, there we go. Our website is back up. And we should be able to log back into our server again. Voila. Now our app runs and all the cool Next.js features should work without additional configuration. So let's try them out. Let's try opening the image. It downloads a WebP image, so image optimizations work. And by the way, you don't have to install the Sharp package anymore. In order for this to work, it's not necessary since Next.js 15. So image optimizations just work out of the box. We already checked the to-do list. We can insert items, we can load these items, delete them, and all is stored in our Postgres database. The dynamic page loads after a delay, static page loads immediately, the ISR page refreshes every 30 seconds. Cool. Streaming also still works. Remember, we added some configuration in our Nginx file earlier to make sure that this works properly. And we can fetch data via the route handler. Nice. And by the way, the website title here is loaded via an environment variable that we added to the .env file earlier. I can show it in the code. Here on the front page, this loads an environment variable. I just wanted to make sure that public environment variables also work. And we can see it does work. If you want to make changes to your code and deploy these changes, you have to repeat some of these steps. You have to go inside your apps folder, inside the project folder. Here you have to run git pull to pull the latest changes from your Git repository. Then you have to compile the project again with npm run build, right? Just like we do it on our local machines. And then you have to restart the app with PM2, restart Next.js, which is the name of the process we gave it in PM2. Remember, we can check this with PM2 status. Next.js is the name of the process. You have to restart this. Of course, there are ways to automate this whole process so that when you push changes to your repository, all of these steps are done automatically, for example with GitHub Actions. But this is beyond the scope of this tutorial. If you want to implement this, you have to Google this yourself, or let me know in the comments if you want to see a full tutorial on this as well. Okay, and then the last thing I want to do in this tutorial is connect a real domain to our website so that we don't have to open it via the IP address, and also install an SSL certificate. First, you have to buy a domain at any of the domain providers. I often use Namecheap. Domains cost money, but usually they are pretty cheap. I went ahead and bought this domain, codingandflow-sample.com. To connect this domain to our server, we can go to Hostinger. Here, click on DNS Manager, and here we can insert this domain, codingandflow-sample.com, or whatever your domain is. Add. Then it automatically figures out the domain provider, and it tells us what we have to change. We have to set the name servers on Namecheap to these two here. So let's go back to Namecheap. Here we can make changes to this domain by clicking on Manage. This depends on your domain name provider. They all offer some option to change the configuration. And here I can change the name servers to custom DNS. And I insert these two name servers from Hostinger and save these changes. Then back in Hostinger, we should be able to confirm these changes. I've changed the name servers. This can take up to 24 hours to come into effect. So after clicking finish, you might have to wait for a while. Sometimes this takes a few minutes. Sometimes it can take a whole day. Let's see, finish. Successfully added to your account. Now, while we are waiting for the DNS changes to propagate, we can already do some additional configuration. We have to open our Nginx config file once again. We created this file earlier, if you remember. So we run this on our server, add the sudo password, and here we want to change the server name from the IP address to the domain we just bought. So we remove the IP address, and I change this to codingandflow-sample.com and also the www version. codingandflow-sample.com. Make sure to spell this correctly and add the semicolon at the end. Control X, Y, Enter. Again, we can check if our configuration is correct. The command for this was somewhere up here, sudo nginx-t. Successful, and then we want to restart the Nginx server again for these changes to come into effect. So now we are down here. We made these changes, we restarted the Nginx server. So after waiting for around 15 minutes, I'm actually already able to open our website. We don't have an SSL certificate yet. This is why we get this warning, and we can only open it under HTTP and not HTTPS. We will fix this in a moment, but I can already open this website, and there it is. Again, it can take up to 24 hours or sometimes even 48 hours before you can reach your website on your domain, but then you should be able to open it. The last step is to connect this SSL certificate, which we can do for free via Certbot. So just a few more steps on our server. So we want to install Certbot, which we can do with this command. You can also open the website to find more instructions here. But I already listed the important ones here in this file. So snap install Certbot. Wait until this has finished. Looks like this was successful. Then we run this command here, which is all described in the Certbot documentation. Looks good. Then we install the SSL certificates, and with this flag it automatically makes the necessary changes to our Nginx configuration. And it also reads the domains that we added earlier in the configuration file. Okay. So here we have to insert an email address. We will get notified when our SSL certificate is about to expire. So use an email address that actually works. Florian@codingandflow.com. We confirm this with yes, with Y. You don't have to share your data here. We can select no. And here it wants us to select the domains for which we want to enable the SSL certificate. We want to do it for both, for the version with and without the www. So we type 1, 2 to insert both domains. And now this will set up the SSL certificate. Okay, I got an error, probably because we didn't wait long enough for the DNS changes to actually be visible. So I'm gonna wait for, I don't know, 30 minutes and then I'm gonna try this again. Actually, I might be getting this error because I didn't remove the old Nginx configuration properly. Earlier we executed this rm nginx command here, but while editing the video I noticed that I got a permission denied error and I didn't notice it while recording. So let's try this again, but this time with the sudo command, so that we have the permissions to execute this. Okay, now the old Nginx configuration is removed. Now let's try Certbot again. So, sudo certbot nginx, and now this should work. Okay, 1, 2 for both domains, and fingers crossed. Yay, it worked. Now I don't know if it was because of the Nginx configuration or because we had to wait. Do both. Now we should have an SSL certificate, and the last command is this one. It's not important, it's just to test automatic renewal, because Certbot renews the SSL certificate automatically when it expires, and with this command we can make sure that this actually works. So let's run this as well, and this should output some success message. There we go, it says congratulations, and now we should be able to open our website on the same URL again, but this time with HTTPS in front of it, because this now runs on a secure connection. Let's quickly check if everything still works. And then it's time to pat yourself on the back, because you deployed your Next.js website on a cheap VPS server. Super cool. If you found this tutorial helpful, please leave a like on this video. And if you want to see another one where we use Docker, please tell me in the comments. Also, I have a free React Best Practices course, which you can get under codingandflow.com/React Best Practices. When you get this course, you will also be put into my free email newsletter where I send web dev tips about once every 2 weeks. Of course, you can unsubscribe at any time, but you probably won't want to. So get a free course under codingandflow.com/React Best Practices. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, and then I hope I see you in the next video. Take care.